The man awoke lying on his back. From his view there was nothing but white. After a few minutes of staring upwards, he rose himself from the ground. He glanced around, and his eyes found nothing to settle upon. In front of him was a vast vertical expanse stretching from either side into infinity. Likewise, the plain seemed to have no limit to its height. With nothing to expect from this void of a wall, the man turned around and saw something a little more recognizable.
A path of cobblestone seemingly floating atop this blank ocean was before him. He continues to move forward on this path, carefully stepping from stone to stone. After only a few more steps, he noticed a single stone drifting apart.
Once the man was close enough, he could distinguish a silhouette standing alone on the single stone. Anxious to finally figure out what was going on, he quickly made his way to the figure. The man discovered just another man on the stone. As he approached, the man on the stone turned and called out to him. "Enebish, my good friend, tell me your story."
Excited to find this man knew him, he went right up in front of the man who claimed to be his friend.
"You know me?"
Said Enebish.
"Please, tell me what's going on. My name is Enebish."
The man laughed, replying,
"Well, of course, my good friend. Come, I will show you the truth."
He extended an open hand towards Enebish. Bewildered, Enebish grasped his hand outward, facing palm.
Suddenly, a sharp pain engulfed Enebish's head. An image overtook him. He began to see a blur of faces surrounding him. He recognized that they were chanting his name.
Enebish! 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 Enebish!
The only familiar face he could see was that of his so-called friend. Just as quickly as it had come, it went, and he was back on the cobblestone path. He suddenly felt a weight pull away from him, and he looked to see that a severed arm was holding his hand. He dropped the arm in horror and looked over the edge of the single cobblestone to see the rest of his friend falling away. A sad smile spread across his face. Tears began to form in Enebish's eyes. "I didn't even know who you were," he said to no one.
With no other choice, he turned back to the path and moved on. After another short amount of time, he spotted another stone away from the path. With more caution, Enebish approached this stone too, eventually discovering another figure on the stone, this time a woman. Once Enebish was near, the woman turned to him and began to scream. Shocked, he stumbled backwards, tripping over and falling on his back. When his head hit the ground, his vision blurred. When he was able to see again, the woman was standing over him, looking into his eyes. He saw into her eyes black holes, and suddenly another image took over his mind. Enebish walked out of her room, and he could hear the woman crying out behind him, begging him not to go. He wondered, go where? But in the image, he kept moving forward and left the woman behind.
Again he returned to the stone pathway. He jolted, shoving the woman before him away from him, unintentionally upsetting her.
"Enebish, I loved you once, but never again now, you beast."
She ran up close to him and slapped him across the face, then turned and ran. Before Enebish could react, she was gone. He held his hand to the sting on his cheek, muttering,
"What in the world was that? Who was that emotional woman?"
Again, he continues down the path. Once more, Enebish was not surprised to find another isolated stone off the path. Yet, the figure once more was a mystery. He reluctantly moved up to the stone, this time shocked to find the figure was not human.
A little tiger cub stood on the single stone and mewed at him. Suddenly, the echo of a young boy sounded in his mind.
Why couldn't you just love us both?
It said. Enebish couldn't understand why, but a great grief consumed him, and he cried out,
"I'm sorry I wasn't good enough."
Back on the path, Enebish looked down and saw that in the little tiger's place was just a pile of bloody leaves. He picked them up and crushed the leaves in his fingers, the blood dripping into his hands. Howling with grief in his heart, he smeared the bits and pieces of the leaves onto his face, scared and desperate for answers.
After what seemed like a long time, Enebish rose and decided he needed to keep going, if he wanted to find the answers he was looking for. This time, each step was heavier than the last. The emotion was starting to take its toll. Again, he came up to a single stone with something upon it. Enebish soon discovered a beautiful ceramic urn painted the colors of spring. He knelt down before it and reached his hand.
As his fingertips met the surface of the urn, a dark flash overtook him. An image with the emotional woman from before was before him on the floor, holding herself and rocking back and forth. She was surrounded by shattered powder. He quickly returned to the path, and the loud sound of breaking glass filled the air. Enebish looked down to see the beautiful urn shattered on the stone and in his hands.
An unimaginable grief that couldn't be compared to from all the others he had faced before overwhelmed him. He grabbed the broken shards and clenched them until blood was streaming down his arms. Enebish jerked up and let the pieces fall to the ground. Consumed by violent grief, he threw himself into the pieces and rolled in them until he was streaking cuts all over his body, screaming all the while.
He was pulling an Iggy Pop.
After Enebish finally calmed down, he returned to his journey on the path. These were the hardest steps of all. He hoped that death would come soon and release him from his misery. Soon enough, he came upon another single stone with another figure. This time he sees a man tied up to a post behind him. Nervously, Enebish approaches the man.
Even once he was in front of the bound man, he refused to acknowledge Enebish. After what seemed like ages, the man finally looked up with accusing eyes at Enebish. The pain and grief that was prominent in the man's eyes shocked Enebish. He wanted to run away. Suddenly, both of the men began to violently shake and vomit blood. Horrified, Enebish, with the taste of blood still in his mouth, turned and ran frantically away. But before he could get far, he stumbled and fell to the ground.
An image takes over. He sees the same man bound to the same post, and in Enebish's hands are bloody knives. Uncontrollably, he thrusts the knives into the bound man's gut, killing him. One screams in pain, and the other in anger and violence. The image quickly ends, and Enebish returns to the path. He picks up himself from the ground, throws his head up to the sky of white nothing, and screams out his anguish and as a broken man.
As Enebish continued down the path only to find yet another figure in the distance. As he drew near the figure, it turned out to be an older man looking down at Enebish with a disapproving scowl. As Enebish approached the old chieftain, he felt like a child walking to his father, knowing he was about to be punished. The old man reached out and grabbed Enebish by the arm, and he was surprised how strong the chieftain was. And that was when the familiar pain and darkness took hold of him once again.
This time, Enebish was on a grassy field with the same old man, but he looked younger. Enebish was holding a wooden sword in his hand, and he was practicing how to fight. He tried to block and missed, and the old man made him pay for it with a hard hit to the head. When he came back around, he was on his back. The old man was gone, but the pain was still there.
He pulled himself up and continued forlornly down the path. As he got closer to what he prayed was the end, he glimpsed another figure, a tall, lean figure, with his back turned to Enebish. When he got close to the figure, it whirled around, only to come face to face with himself.
The face that stared at him was Enebish's face, but it was his face with all of its malevolence. A twisted snarl bared its wolfish teeth, and a sinewy arm shot out and gripped Enebish by his throat and lifted him up, while the other hand darted to his pocket and grabbed a wicked dagger.
Enebish watched in a horrified, choking silence as the other hand brought the dagger up and in a jagged arc opened up its own throat, all the while grinning maniacally. With a gasping roar, Enebish shoved the evil doppelganger away from him, wrenching the dagger from the abomination's hand, and plunged the dagger into its head, and held it there until the thrashing stopped.
Panting, Enebish staggered away from the thing, and then he saw it. An end to the arduous road. There was another wall similar to the one he saw at the beginning to the path, except this one possessed an open window, through which the details were vague, curious, but still apprehensive. Enebish moved closer and peered into the abyss, but then the abyss changed into a flurry of Enebish that he recognized as his own memory.
He remembered his good friend, the one that inducted him into the war movement. He remembered leaving his wife behind so he could venture off to serve in meaningless bloodshed. He remembered that his son had stormed out into the jungle distraught after an angry argument broke out between Enebish and his wife. The day after, hunters had brought back the lifeless body of his son, saying he had been mauled by a tiger. He remembered the argument over him leaving for war. That was when he had done it. Enebish had picked up his wife's heirloom and hurled it at her pregnant belly. And that was when he had committed the murder of his unborn child.
Then the old man came into view, and he remembered that this old man was his father. He had taught him to be the monster he had become, and he realized how much he resented him for that.
There was a blinding flash of light, and Enebish was no longer on the path of the floating cobblestones. He was back in reality where he could feel, hear, and see everything once more. Pain engulfed his body. Pain was everywhere.
Dying, a death of being slain in battle. Struggling for air, each painful breath he took spattered his blood on the ground. He heard footsteps in the distance, and he turned his head in the direction of the noise. He wondered if it was his wife, his beautiful savior. He hoped it was his wife.
This is not the end. No. This is not the end.